The crimson ships descended through Earth's atmosphere like falling stars, their hulls glowing with the heat of entry. Commander Zethkar watched the blue-green planet grow larger through the viewport of his flagship, his four arms crossed in satisfaction. Behind him, his elite squad of Vorthak executioners checked their weapons one final time. "Another primitive world," Zethkar growled, his mandibles clicking with amusement. "The Galactic Council grows soft, sending us to deal with such weak prey." The Vorthaks had earned their reputation across 1,000 worlds. They were the galaxy's finest killers, called upon when entire species needed to be eliminated quickly and efficiently. Their black exoskeletons could deflect most energy weapons. Their reflexes were 10 times faster than most sentient beings, and their claws could cut through steel like paper. "Sir," reported his second-in-command, Crixtel, "orbital scans confirm the inhabitants are still using primitive chemical propulsion and basic electronics. No energy shields, no plasma weapons. This will be over within a solar cycle." Zethkar's compound eyes gleamed. The humans had been declared a threat to galactic peace after their recent ventures into space. Some nonsense about their expansion being too aggressive, their military tactics too brutal. The Council wanted them gone before they could develop real technology. "Begin the standard protocol," Zethkar ordered. "Land in their largest population centers. Make examples of their leaders. Let fear break them before we even begin the real extermination." The first ship touched down in the heart of New York City, crushing several vehicles under its massive weight. Pedestrians screamed and fled as the hull split open like a blooming flower. Steam hissed from the opening, and through the misstepped beings from humanity's worst nightmares, each Vorthak stood nearly 8 feet tall, their segmented bodies covered in natural armor that gleamed like obsidian. 4 arms ended in razor-sharp claws, and their heads resembled those of enormous insects. With multifaceted eyes and clicking mandibles that dripped with paralytic venom. "Humans," Zethkar's voice boomed through his ship's external speakers, translated into perfect English. "I am Commander Zethkar of the Vorthak Execution Corps. Your species has been judged unfit for continued existence. Prepare for termination." But instead of the mass panic he expected, something strange happened. The humans didn't run screaming into the distance. They didn't drop to their knees begging for mercy. Instead, they pulled out small rectangular devices and began pointing them at his warriors. "Are those weapons?" Crixtel asked, confused. The devices were clearly primitive technology. Before Zethkar could answer, his comm system exploded with reports from landing sites across the planet. "Sir, the humans they're recording us." "With their primitive communication devices? Recording?" Zethkar was baffled. What kind of species documented their own extinction? On the streets below, a human female approached his lead warrior, Grathmore. She was tiny compared to the massive alien, barely reaching his chest, with golden hair and no visible weapons or armor. Any sane being would have fled in terror from Grathmore's presence. "Excuse me," the human said calmly, holding up her device. "I'm Sarah Chun with Channel 7 News. Could you comment on your intentions here? Are you planning to harm civilians?" Grathmore stared down at this incomprehensible creature. In his 3 centuries of executions, no prey species had ever walked up to him and asked questions. They either ran, fought desperately, or cowered in terror. I am here to kill," he managed to say, his universal translator struggling with his confusion. "Could you elaborate on that?" Sarah pressed, completely unafraid. "What's your reasoning? What authority gave you this mandate?" Other humans were gathering now, not to flee or attack, but to watch. Some were indeed running away, but others were moving closer, their recording devices active. Children peered around their parents' legs with curious rather than terrified expressions. "Sir?" came another report over the comm. "The humans in London they're asking us to pose for pictures. And the ones in Tokyo have started selling food to the crowd that's watching us." Zethkar's mandibles clicked in frustration. This is not how conquests proceed. Begin standard intimidation tactics. Execute a few dozen to show our power. Grathmore raised his primary claws, ready to slice the persistent reporter in half. But before he could strike, something grabbed his wrist. He looked down in shock to see another human, this one male, wearing a blue uniform with a shiny badge. "I'm going to have to ask you to step back, sir," the police officer said firmly. "You're threatening a journalist, and that's against the law." The concept of law being applied to a Vorthak executioner was so absurd that Grathmore stood frozen. The human's grip couldn't possibly restrain him, yet there was something in the man's eyes that gave him pause. The officer showed no fear, only determination and a strange kind of authority. "You dare touch me?" Grathmore snarled, but he found himself not immediately killing the impudent creature. "Look, buddy," the officer said, "I don't know what your deal is, but you can't just threaten people in my city. We've got laws here, and they apply to everyone, even 8-foot bug guys with too many arms." Around the world, similar scenes were playing out. In Paris, a group of artists had set up easels and were sketching the alien invaders. In Moscow, an elderly babushka was trying to feed soup to a confused Vorthak warrior. In Sydney, a tour guide was explaining to a growing crowd the architectural differences between the alien ships and local buildings. "Sir," Crickstell's voice was strained, "I'm getting reports that some humans are laughing at us. They think we're some kind of entertainment." This was unprecedented. In his career spanning dozens of species extinctions, Zethkar had never encountered a race that responded to imminent death with curiosity rather than terror. The Vorthaks were masters of psychological warfare. Their very appearance was designed to trigger primal fear responses in most sentient species. "Perhaps they're too primitive to understand the threat," suggested his tactical officer Blethonox. "Their brains may not be developed enough to process danger properly." But Zethkar wasn't convinced. He watched through his warrior's optical feeds as more humans approached. A group of teenagers had surrounded one of his soldiers and were trying to take selfies with him. An old man was explaining to another warrior how to properly hold a fishing rod. Apparently convinced the alien claws were some kind of elaborate fishing equipment. "Commander," came an urgent transmission from the team that had landed at the Pentagon. "We have a problem. The humans here aren't running either. Their military leaders want to negotiate. They're offering us coffee and asking about our spaceship technology." "Coffee?" Zethkar didn't understand the word, even with translation. "It appears to be a mild stimulant beverage. They seem to think sharing it is some kind of diplomatic protocol." This was rapidly becoming the strangest execution mission in Vorthak history. These humans were either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Either way, they weren't behaving like any prey species the executioners had encountered in Washington. General Patricia Hayes sat across from 3 Vorthak warriors in a conference room that had been hastily cleared for the meeting. She'd ordered her staff to treat the aliens as foreign dignitaries until their intentions became clearer. "So," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee and offering one to the lead alien, who stared at it suspiciously. "You've traveled here from another planet to kill us all. That's quite a commute. What's the reasoning behind this decision?" The Vorthak translator Yexalin struggled to respond. "The Galactic Council has deemed humanity a threat. You expand too aggressively. Your military tactics are considered excessive." General Hayes almost choked on her coffee. "Excessive? Have you seen what you guys look like? You're literally called executioners, and you arrived in what can only be described as murder ships." "This is different," Yexalin insisted. "We are professionals." "You are chaotic? I see." Hayes leaned back in her chair. "And who exactly is on this Galactic Council? What gives them the authority to decide whether entire species live or die?" For the first time in the conversation, the Vorthak seemed uncertain. "They are the established powers. They maintain order." Hayes nodded. "So you're the police force for a group of alien governments that humanity has never met, never agreed to be governed by, and never had any say in joining. And they've decided we need to die because we're too good at war." When she put it like that, even Yexalin had to admit it sounded questionable. Back in New York, Zethkar was growing increasingly frustrated. His warriors were supposed to have begun the systematic extermination by now, but instead they were stuck in increasingly bizarre interactions with humans who seemed to treat their arrival as anything from a curiosity to a minor inconvenience. "Sir?" Grathmore-'s voice was strained. "I need backup. This human female won't stop asking questions, and this male in the blue uniform says I need a permit to perform executions in his jurisdiction. Just kill them both!" Zethkar snarled. "I tried, sir, but more humans keep arriving. They're forming what they call a crowd control barrier, and several of them claim to be lawyers. I don't understand what lawyers are. But they seem very confident about something called due process." Zethkar looked at his tactical displays. "Similar reports were co?" The realization hit Zethkar like a physical blow. Soldiers, all of them. How was that possible? His species had studied thousands of worlds and never encountered a planet where the entire population had military capability. "Explain," he commanded Yexelen. "Sir, I've been observing their behavior patterns. The female leader here, General Hayes, moves like a veteran warrior. But so does the male who brought us the coffee, and the female who took our coats at the door, and the guards. They all have the same underlying alertness, the same tactical awareness. Across the global communication network, similar reports flooded in. In Tokyo, what the Vortex had taken for curious civilians were revealing themselves as off-duty police, retired military personnel, and martial arts instructors. The supposed children watching from behind their parents were actually young people trained in self-defense from early ages. In London, the humans asking for photographs had been memorizing weapon configurations and armor weak points. The food vendors had been positioning themselves to control crowd flow and maintain sight lines to escape routes. "This is impossible," Krikstel protested. "No species evolves with universal military training." But Zethkar was beginning to understand something terrible. "Unless," he said slowly, "they didn't evolve that way. Unless they learned." General Hayes leaned forward in her chair, studying the three alien executioners with professional interest. She'd spent 40 years in the military, from a young lieutenant in desert conflicts to her current position as head of joint operations. She recognized killers when she saw them, and these creatures were definitely that, but she also recognized something else. They were confused. Whatever they'd expected to find on Earth, it wasn't what they were seeing. "Can I ask you something?" she said to Yexelen, who seemed to be the most communicative of the three. "In your experience, when your people arrive to execute a species, how do they usually respond?" Yexelen's mandibles clicked uncertainly. "They run. Or they fight desperately and die quickly. Or they surrender and beg for mercy." "And we're not doing any of those things?" "No, you are not." Hayes nodded thoughtfully. "Do you know why that is?" The alien translator remained silent, but his compound eyes were fixed on her with what she was starting to recognize as growing wariness. "It's because we've been where you are," Hayes continued. "We know what it's like to be the ones with superior firepower, arriving to eliminate a threat. We've been the executioners." She stood up and walked to the window that looked out over Washington, D.C. In the distance, she could see one of the alien ships, surrounded by what appeared to be curious civilians, but which she knew was actually a carefully maintained perimeter of plainclothes security personnel. The difference is, we learned to be executioners by necessity. We didn't start that way. We learned because if we didn't, we'd be extinct. Yexelen's translator worked overtime processing concepts that didn't fit his worldview. "I do not understand. Your species, I'm guessing, evolved as apex predators. Top of your food chain from the beginning. Natural hunters, natural killers." Hayes turned back to face him. "We didn't. We were prey. Middle of the food chain at best. Weak, slow, no natural weapons, no armor." She gestured to her own body, small and soft compared to the armored giants across from her. "So we had to get creative. We had to become better at killing than anything that wanted to kill us. Not just individual killing, but organized killing. Strategic killing. We had to become so good at war that nothing could threaten us." The implications of her words were starting to sink in for Yexelen. A species that had learned warfare out of necessity rather than natural ability. A species that had been forced to perfect the art of killing to survive. Every human child learns basic strategy through games, Hayes continued conversationally. Every human adult has been through some form of conflict training, whether military, police, security, or just self-defense classes. Every human community has emergency response protocols that look remarkably like military operations. She returned to her seat and poured another cup of coffee, her movements casual but precise. Yaxelin noticed that she never turned her back fully to them, never put herself in a position where she couldn't react quickly. We don't have a warrior caste because we don't need one. We're all warriors. It's how we survived long enough to build civilization. Meanwhile, in New York, the situation was escalating rapidly. Officer Martinez kept his sidearm pressed against Grathmer's head while Sarah Shun continued her broadcast. Now fully aware that she was documenting what might be first contact with hostile aliens. "I don't want to hurt you," Martinez said quietly to the Vorthek warrior. "But if you make a move toward any civilians, I will put you down. Do you understand?" Grathmer's compound eyes focused on the small weapon. His natural armor could probably deflect it, but something in the human's voice suggested this wouldn't be a simple shooting. This human would find a way to make it count. "You cannot stop me," Grathmer said, but there was less certainty in his voice than before. "Maybe not," Martinez agreed, "but I'll slow you down enough for backup to arrive. And our backup is very good at their jobs." As if summoned by his words, the distinctive thump of helicopter rotors filled the air. Grathmer looked up to see aircraft approaching from multiple directions, sleek and purposeful. But these weren't the primitive flying machines the Vortheks had expected. These moved with the precision of military hardware. "NYPD emergency response," a voice boomed from the lead helicopter's speakers. "Alien vessel and personnel, you are surrounded. Stand down and prepare for negotiation." Surrounded? Grathmer activated his tactical display and felt his blood chill. Humans had appeared on rooftops throughout the area, visible now that they wanted to be seen. They carried weapons that might be primitive by galactic standards, but there were dozens of them. All with clear sight lines to the alien landing zone on the street level. What had appeared to be random civilians were revealing themselves as police officers, security personnel, and emergency responders. They'd been there all along, blending into the crowd, waiting. "Sir," Grathmer transmitted to his commander, "I think we've walked into a trap." But Zethkar was dealing with his own problems. Reports were flooding in from every landing site. The humans had been ready for them. Not ready in the sense of advanced technology or superior firepower, but ready in the way that only comes from thinking like a soldier in Moscow. The babushka who had offered soup was now standing with a group of Spetsnaz, veterans who had emerged from the surrounding buildings. She wasn't just a kind old woman. She was a veteran combat medic who had survived the siege of Stalingrad in Paris. The artists had set down their easels and were coordinating with police tactical teams that had been positioned around the landing site since the ships first appeared on radar. In Sydney, the tour guide was actually a retired special air service commander who had been providing real-time intelligence to Australian Defence Force units. While keeping the aliens distracted, every landing site had been quietly surrounded by humans who knew exactly what they were doing. How did they coordinate this so quickly? Krikstel demanded. "We've only been on the surface for 30 minutes. Zethkar was beginning to understand the horrible truth. They didn't coordinate it quickly. They were already coordinated. This is their normal state. The concept was staggering. A planet where the civilian population could instantly transform into a military force without visible communication or organization. Where grandmothers were veterans and artists were intelligence operatives and tour guides were special forces. "Sir," came a transmission from the team in Beijing, "the humans here are... they're laughing at us again. But it's different now. It's not confused laughter. It's confident." Zethkar switched to that team's visual feed and saw what his warrior meant. The humans surrounding the landing site were indeed laughing, but there was no humor in it. It was the laugh of experienced soldiers who had just realized their enemy had made a tactical error. General Hayes finished her coffee and stood up. I think it's time we continued this conversation with some additional participants. She pressed a button on the conference table, and the doors opened to admit a dozen individuals. Yexon's Universal Translator struggled to identify them from their appearance, but their bearing was unmistakable. These were killers of the highest caliber. Allow me to introduce some colleagues, Hayes said pleasantly. Colonel Sarah Thompson, Army Special Forces. Captain James Rodriguez, Navy SEALs. Master Sergeant Linda Chun, Marine Force Recon. Agent Michael Stevens, CIA Special Activities Division. The introductions continued, each one representing a different aspect of human warfare expertise. Yexelin realized with growing dread that he was surrounded by what amounted to humanity's greatest killers, all sitting calmly around a conference table as if this were a routine business meeting. The thing is, Hayes continued, we've been monitoring your ship since you entered our solar system 3 days ago. We've had time to prepare? 3 days? Zethkar's tactical display showed their arrival time as 30 minutes ago. Your ships are impressive, admitted Colonel Thompson, but your approach was remarkably unsubtle. Our deep space monitoring systems detected you before you reached Mars orbit. Impossible, Yexon protested. You don't have deep space, Kapabi. The communication came through on all frequencies simultaneously, broadcasted directly to every Vorthik ship in the fleet. General Hayes' voice was calm, professional, and absolutely terrifying in its confidence. Commander Zethkar, this is General Patricia Hayes, representing Earth's Unified Defense Command. I believe we have something to discuss. Zethkar's mandibles clicked nervously. Unified Defense Command? His intelligence briefings had indicated that humans were divided into dozens of competing nations with no central authority. You are bluffing, he transmitted back. Humans have no unified command structure. You're right, Hayes agreed cheerfully. We don't have one normally. But you showed up on our doorstep talking about extinction, and that tends to get everyone's attention. Funny how a common threat can bring people together. Through his various visual feeds, Zethkar could see the truth of her words. At every landing site, humans who had been going about their daily lives were now working together with seamless coordination. Police, military, civilians, and even children were operating as a single organism. Impossible, Crickstell muttered. Species don't coordinate that rapidly without years of preparation. But Agent Stevens' voice cut in, apparently monitoring their communications. That's where you made your biggest mistake. You assumed we weren't already prepared. Did you really think a species that survived on a planet full of large predators would ever stop being ready for the next threat? Master Sergeant Chin's voice added, Every human settlement has emergency protocols. Every human adult knows basic combat medicine, threat assessment, and evacuation procedures. Every human child learns to work as part of a team under pressure. It's not military preparation, it's basic survival skills. In New York, Officer Martinez was still maintaining his position against Grathmar's head, but the alien warrior was beginning to understand that the human was just the visible tip of a very large iceberg. The surrounding buildings were full of humans with weapons, all coordinating through communication devices they wore on their wrists or carried in their pockets. Sir, Grathmar transmitted to his commander, I'm monitoring their communications. They're not just coordinated locally. They're connected to military units across their entire planet, in real time. This was perhaps the most disturbing revelation yet. The humans had a planetary communication network that allowed instant coordination between any points on their world. When the Vorthiks had landed in multiple cities simultaneously, thinking to divide human defenses, they had instead walked into a trap that was being coordinated globally. How many of you are soldiers? Grathmar asked Officer Martinez, unable to hide his growing unease. Martinez considered the question seriously. Depends on how you define soldier. I'm a cop, but I spent 6 years in the army before this. My partner over there, he nodded toward a woman covering them from across the street, is Marine Reserves. The EMT behind you did 3 tours in Afghanistan. The guy running the hot dog stand is retired Navy. He paused, then continued matter-of-factly. But if you're asking how many of us know how to fight when we need to, all of us, even the kids. Especially the kids sometimes. As if to prove his point, a group of teenagers approached the perimeter. Instead of gawking like typical civilians, they moved with purpose and awareness. One of them, a girl who couldn't have been more than 16, spoke into a small radio device. Perimeter Team 3 to command, requesting permission to establish secondary observation post on the building roof at coordinates ... She rattled off precise location data like a veteran forward observer. Grathmer stared. Children should not know military terminology. They're not just children, Martinez corrected. They're human children. Big difference. General Hayes' voice continued to broadcast to the alien fleet. Commander, I want to share something with you. Are you familiar with the concept of mutually assured destruction? Zethkar accessed his cultural database. A primitive strategic doctrine where species threaten to destroy themselves rather than accept defeat. Close, but not quite right. It's where we threaten to destroy our enemies even if it means destroying ourselves. The key difference is that we're usually willing to follow through. Colonel Thompson's voice joined the conversation. Commander, I want you to understand something about human psychology. We're the only species we know of that voluntarily throws ourselves on grenades to save our teammates. We're the only species that charges into machine gun fire because someone needs to take the position. We're the only species that fights harder when we're losing. Captain Rodriguez added his own observation. We have a saying, if you find yourself in a fair fight, your tactics suck. We don't believe in fair fights. We believe in winning, regardless of cost. This was information that hadn't been in any of the Galactic Council's briefings. The Vorthax were beginning to realize that their intelligence about humanity was not just incomplete, but fundamentally wrong. Sir, Yexelin transmitted privately to Zethkar. I'm reviewing our mission parameters. The Council's assessment was based on observations of human conflicts with each other. But those conflicts were restrained, explain. They fought each other with rules, protocols about civilians, prisoners, acceptable weapons. They held back. But these same humans facing extinction? I don't think they'll hold back. The terrifying implications sank in. The Galactic Council had observed humanity at war, but not humanity facing an existential threat. They had seen the humans' restrained tactics against their own species, not their total warfare capability against an external enemy. Agent Stevens seemed to read their thoughts. You've been watching us fight each other, haven't you? Think we're too soft because we have Geneva Conventions and rules of engagement? His laugh was cold. Those rules are for fighting other humans. People who might be our neighbors after the war ends. People who have families and cultures we can understand. People who might surrender. Master Sergeant Chin's voice carried a chilling edge. You're not people to us. You're aliens who came to our world talking about extinction. Different rules apply? General Hayes resumed control of the conversation. Commander, I'm going to make this very simple for you. You have two choices. Choice 1, you leave. Right now, turn around, go back to whatever council sent you, and tell them that humanity is off limits. And choice 2? Zethkar found himself asking, though he dreaded the answer. Choice 2, you stay and find out why every species on our planet that was bigger, stronger, and better armed than us is now extinct. The silence that followed was absolute. Around the world, Vorthak warriors were beginning to understand the magnitude of their miscalculation. They had come to execute a primitive species and instead found themselves surrounded by what amounted to an entire planet of soldiers. Sir, came a transmission from the team in Berlin. The local humans have started singing. Singing? Zethkar was baffled by this new development. Through the audio feed he heard it. Human voices raised in harmony, but the song was unlike anything in his cultural database. It wasn't a victory chant or a war cry. It was something far more unsettling. It was casual, confident, the sound of predators who knew they had already won. They're singing their national anthem, the Berlin team leader reported. But sir, other humans are joining in. Humans who aren't from this nation. They're all singing together, but in different languages. Similar reports came in from other cities. The humans weren't just coordinating tactically. They were coordinating emotionally. Despite being different nationalities with different languages and cultures, they were presenting a unified front against the external threat in Washington. General Hayes stood up and walked to the window again. "Commander, can I tell you what I see when I look out there?" Zethkar found himself listening despite himself. "I see a species that spent 200,000 years being hunted by things with bigger teeth, stronger claws, and more armor than us. I see a species that survived ice ages, plagues, supervolcanoes, and asteroid impacts. I see a species that looked at every challenge that should have killed us and decided to get better instead." She turned back toward the aliens in the room. "We domesticated wolves to help us hunt bigger prey. We invented spears to kill things we couldn't catch with our hands. We learned to make fire to cook meat and forge metal. We developed agriculture to support larger populations. We created cities to organize our efforts. We built armies to protect what we built." Colonel Thompson continued the thought. "Every advancement we've ever made was because something wanted to kill us and we refused to die. We've been preparing for you for our entire evolutionary history." Agent Stevens smiled grimly. "The only mistake you made was assuming that primitive technology meant primitive thinking. Our weapons might be simple, but our tactics have been refined by millennia of warfare against superior opponents." Master Sergeant Chun activated another holographic display. This one showed global troop movements happening in real time. "Commander, while we've been talking, we've moved 500,000 soldiers into position around your landing sites. Not because we needed to, but because we could." The display showed the impossible, an entire planet's military assets being coordinated as a single force, all focused on the alien threat. "Your ships are powerful," Captain Rodriguez admitted, "but they're designed to flee.